I knew she'd come. She always cared too much.
Just don't let her ruin today.
Wait, is that Regina?
Cold, gray clouds hung over North Ohio, like the town itself was holding its breath. Regina sat in the back seat of a black SUV parked across from the country club. The engine was running softly. Heat filled the car, but her fingers still felt cold. Across the parking lot, through the giant glass windows of the ballroom, she could see people laughing with champagne in their hands. Women in expensive dresses, men adjusting their ties. The same people who once watched her carry 2 suitcases out of the house she shared with Walter. Some of them had looked sorry for her. Some of them had enjoyed it. Today, every one of them was inside celebrating Walter marrying the woman he left her for. Regina looked down at the silver necklace in her hand. The chain was old and slightly faded. Walter had bought it for her years ago at a flea market near the lake. Back when they were young. Back when he used to look at her like she mattered. "You deserve something prettier," he had told her that day. Regina smiled and touched the tiny heart hanging from the chain. "I do not want prettier," she said. "I want something that means something." For years, she wore that necklace almost every day. Then one night, Walter came home smelling like another woman's perfume and told her words she still had not forgotten. "You never could give me the kind of life she can." Regina closed her eyes. The memory hit just as hard now as it did that night. The kitchen, the cold food on the table, the look on his face when he said it, like loving her, had become embarrassing. Her fingers tightened around the necklace until the edges pressed into her palm. "You were the one who taught me what it feels like to be unwanted," she whispered quietly. Her voice cracked on the last word. For a second, Regina thought she might cry. Then she heard a small, sleepy sound beside her. She turned. The twins were asleep in the other row of seats. Her little girl had one tiny hand curled under her cheek. Her little boy was leaning against his sister with his mouth slightly open, still holding the stuffed bear he refused to let go of. Regina stared at them, and something inside her shifted. Walter had no idea they existed. No idea that while he was out chasing money, parties, and a woman who made him feel important, Regina had been carrying his children alone. He never saw the nights she cried in that tiny apartment. He never saw her working until her feet hurt so badly she could barely stand. He never saw the day she gave birth, and he never saw the man who stayed. Regina wiped beneath her eyes quickly before the tears could ruin her makeup. Then she sat up straighter and looked back toward the ballroom. If somebody has ever made you feel like you were not enough, take a second to like this story and tell me in the comments what helped you survive it. Because Regina had no idea the next 10 minutes were about to change everything. Outside the window, another black SUV rolled slowly into the parking lot. A moment later, Regina heard the car door open. She looked up just as he stepped out. Walter, not the Walter inside the ballroom. The other one. Tall, calm, dark coat. The kind of man who never had to raise his voice to make people pay attention. Just 30 minutes earlier, his private jet had landed at the small airport outside town. Now he walked toward the SUV through the cold morning air, like he had all the time in the world. When he opened the door, Regina looked up at him. For a second, neither of them said anything. Then his eyes dropped to the necklace in her hand. "You kept it," he said softly. "I do not know why." "Yes, you do." He reached inside gently and fixed the thin strap of her emerald dress where it had slipped from her shoulder. His fingers brushed her skin for only a second, but it was enough to steady her. "You do not owe anybody your pain anymore," he said. Regina looked at him, at the man who held her hand in the hospital, the man who loved her children, the man who never once made her beg to be chosen. Outside, the convoy of black SUVs began moving toward the entrance of the country club. Inside that ballroom, Regina's ex-husband was standing beside another woman, smiling like he had already won. He had no idea the woman he broke was about to walk through those doors with a secret that would ruin everything. Welcome to Mr. Kingswell Stories, where powerful life lessons are shared through unforgettable storytelling. If you're new here, we're glad to have you. Subscribe and join us for more inspiring stories that motivate, uplift, and open the mind. And before we begin, tell me the time and where you are watching from. North Ohio was the kind of place where nobody needed social media to know your business. People knew who was late on their rent because they saw the landlord's truck parked outside. They knew who got a promotion because somebody's cousin worked at the same office. They knew who was fighting, who was cheating, who was drinking too much, and who was pretending everything was fine. On summer evenings, people sat on front porches with sweet tea and watched the neighborhood like it was television. And if two people were deeply in love, the whole town noticed that too. That was Regina and Walter. By the time Regina was 24, people talked about them like they had been together forever. You know, those two are probably gonna die old together, somebody would say at church. They always look so happy, another person would answer. Even the people who did not like seeing other folks happy had to admit it. Regina and Walter looked like the kind of love people spend years hoping for. Regina was beautiful in a quiet, natural way. She had soft brown skin, warm eyes, and a smile that made people feel safe. She came from the kind of family where Sunday mornings meant church clothes laid out the night before, where her mother kept extra food in the kitchen in case somebody stopped by hungry, and where everybody talked loudly at family cookouts because nobody believed in keeping feelings to themselves. Regina grew up believing love was something you protected. Her mother used to stand at the stove stirring greens or cornbread and say the same thing every time Regina asked about relationships. If a man truly loves you, you will never have to beg him to treat you right. Regina believed that. Back then, she believed Walter too. Walter grew up only 3 streets away. His family was different from Regina's. Quieter, more reserved. The kind of family that sat around a dinner table every night speaking softly while the television stayed off. They spent weekends at a small cabin by the lake. His mother folded napkins. His father fixed things around the house and barely spoke unless he had something important to say. Walter was tall, broad-shouldered, with blue eyes and an easy smile that made people trust him almost immediately. Even as a young man, there was something calm about him. People liked him. Women noticed him. But the only person he seemed interested in was Regina. The first time he really spoke to her, Regina was 14. Every afternoon she walked home from school past the small auto shop where Walter worked with his uncle. She would walk by with headphones on, books in her arms, acting like she did not notice him. Walter noticed her every single time. One afternoon, he wiped his hands on a rag and leaned against the garage door as she passed. "Your backpack getting heavier every day?" he asked. Regina did not even look at him. "No," she said, "but your lines are getting worse every day." Walter laughed so hard, he nearly dropped the wrench in his hand. From that day on, he always found a reason to talk to her. Sometimes he asked about school. Sometimes he teased her about the giant headphones she wore. Sometimes he offered to carry her books, and Regina told him no, just because she liked watching him try. Years passed. Regina grew up. Walter stayed around. By the time she was old enough, everybody already knew those two were going to end up together. Their first real date happened at the little park near the lake outside town. Walter showed up nervous even though he tried to act confident. He brought a blanket, sandwiches, and a radio that barely worked. The radio kept fading in and out. Regina laughed every time the music disappeared. "You are not exactly good at this," she teased. Walter looked embarrassed. "I am trying." "You are failing. You still came." Regina looked at him for a second. "Unfortunately." Walter smiled so hard Regina had to look away. That became their thing. He would do something awkward. She would tease him. He would grin like she had just told him the best news in the world. During the summers, they spent almost every evening together. Sometimes they sat on Regina's front porch after dinner. The porch light glowed above them, while the rest of the neighborhood slowly went dark. Walter would sit on the top step, while Regina leaned against the railing with her bare feet tucked under her. They talked about everything, the places they wanted to visit, the kind of house they wanted someday, how many kids they might have. Walter said 4. Regina laughed. "You are out of your mind. At least 3. You are still out of your mind." "Fine," he said. 2. Regina smiled. "Maybe." There were nights by the lake, too. The two of them would sit on the hood of Walter's old truck, with their feet hanging over the edge. The windows were down. The air smelled like grass and water. Fireflies blinked across the dark. Walter once looked over at her and said quietly, "You know I am going to marry you one day, right?" Regina rolled her eyes. "You cannot even afford new tires." "I will get the tires later." "You are ridiculous." "But I am serious." Regina looked out across the lake because she did not want him to see her smile. Walter taught her how to drive in an empty church parking lot one Saturday afternoon. Regina almost drove over the curb twice. Walter grabbed the dashboard and shouted, "Jesus Christ, you said, stay calm." I was calm until I almost met Jesus. Regina laughed so hard she had to pull the car over. People judged them sometimes. They always did. Some people thought Walter was too old for her. Others thought they were too different. There were comments, looks, whispers. One woman from the neighborhood once pulled Regina aside outside church and said, "You sure that boy is right for you?" Regina looked her dead in the face. I did not ask. Walter heard about it later. "You do not have to defend me all the time," he said. Regina shrugged. "I know. Then why do you?" She looked at him like the answer was obvious. "Because you are mine." Walter never forgot that. Years later, on a warm evening by the same lake where they spent half their lives together, Walter finally asked her to marry him. There were no flowers, no violin music, no crowd, just the sound of the water and the soft orange light from the sunset. Walter stood in front of her, looking more nervous than Regina had ever seen him. "You are still the best thing that ever happened to me," he said. Regina started crying before he even reached into his pocket. When he opened the ring box, she could barely see it through her tears. "Yes," she whispered immediately. Walter laughed. "I did not even ask yet. You are taking too long." He slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he kissed her. And standing there by the lake, with the sun disappearing behind the water and Walter's arms around her, Regina believed she was marrying the one man who would never let her feel alone. The first year of their marriage felt so easy that Regina sometimes wondered if she had somehow gotten luckier than everybody else. Their house was small, but Regina loved every inch of it. It sat on a quiet street in North Ohio, with a white porch swing that squeaked every time somebody sat on it. The kitchen was too narrow. The hallway light flickered if you left it on too long. The backyard had more dirt than grass, but it was theirs. Regina filled the house with little things that made it feel warm. Candles on the coffee table, framed pictures from the lake, a blanket folded over the couch, because Walter always got cold watching movies, even though he pretended he did not. Above the kitchen window, she hung a little wooden sign she found at a flea market. "Home is where love lives." Walter laughed when she brought it home. "You know that sign looks like something an old lady would buy, and yet here it is, in your kitchen. Our kitchen." Regina smiled every time he said that. Their kitchen became the center of everything. On Friday nights, Regina cooked while Walter stood behind her pretending to help. Mostly, he just stole bites off the cutting board and wrapped his arms around her waist. "You smell too good," he would whisper against her neck. "You always say that when you want extra food. And does it work?" Unfortunately, Walter grinned. Still got it. They danced in that kitchen too. Sometimes late at night after dinner, Walter would turn on old music from his phone and hold out his hand dramatically. "Mrs. Walter, may I have this dance? You are being ridiculous." "That is not a no." Regina would laugh and let him pull her close anyway. They moved around the tiny kitchen in socks while the dishwasher hummed and the porch light glowed through the window. Most of the time, Walter stepped on her feet. "You are terrible at this," Regina said. "You still married me. Sometimes people make mistakes." Walter would kiss her forehead and hold her tighter. In the summer, they filled the backyard with folding chairs and cheap string lights for cookouts. Regina's family came over with trays of food and loud conversations. Walter stood by the grill trying to act like he knew what he was doing, while Regina's uncles laughed at him. "You burnt the chicken again," Regina said one afternoon. "It is not burnt. It has character. It has smoke." Walter looked offended. "You are supposed to defend your husband. You are supposed to learn how to cook." Everybody laughed. Later that night, after everyone went home, Regina and Walter sat on the back steps sharing the last piece of peach cobbler straight from the pan. Walter looked over at her. "You know what my favorite part is?" "What?" "When everybody leaves." Regina frowned. "That is rude." "No," he said softly, "because then I get you all to myself." Back then, Walter looked at her like she was the center of his whole world, and Regina believed him. There were small moments too, the kind people forget to talk about when they tell love stories. Rainy Sunday mornings when they stayed in bed too long, Walter falling asleep during movies and pretending he was still awake. Regina sitting between his legs on the couch while she braided her hair. Walter always tried to help. He was terrible at it. "You are making it crooked," Regina said one night. "I am trying. You are failing. You still love me." Regina leaned back against him and smiled. Unfortunately, he kissed the side of her head. Those were the moments that made her feel safe. The ordinary ones. The kind that make you think life will stay that way forever. But love does not usually disappear all at once. It leaves quietly, a little at a time. At first, Regina barely noticed. Walter started working later. "Busy day," he would say when he walked through the door. Then the late nights happened more often. Then came the business dinners. Walter started keeping his phone turned face down on the table. He took calls outside on the porch. If Regina walked near him, he lowered his voice. "Who was that?" she asked once. "Work, at 9:30 at night." Walter sighed like she was bothering him. "You know how things are right now." Regina nodded, even though she did not. She kept making excuses for him because that is what people do when they love somebody. Maybe he was stressed. Maybe work was difficult. Maybe marriage changed people. Maybe she was overthinking. Every time her stomach tightened, she told herself not to be dramatic. One night, Walter came home late and went straight to the shower without even kissing her hello. Regina stood in the kitchen watching the bathroom light under the door. When he finally came out, she smiled anyway. "I saved you dinner. I am not hungry." That hurt more than it should have, because Walter was always hungry. The distance between them grew in small ways. He stopped reaching for her hand, stopped kissing her forehead when he left for work, stopped asking how her day was. Sometimes they sat in the same room without speaking at all, and even though Walter was sitting right there beside her, Regina felt lonely in a way she never had before. One Friday night, she decided she was going to fix it. She left work early and spent the whole evening making Walter's favorite dinner: baked chicken, mac and cheese, candied yams, cornbread, the kind of meal that filled the whole house with warmth. By 7 o'clock, everything was ready. By 8, Regina had changed into the soft red dress Walter always loved, the one he once told her made her look dangerously pretty. She curled her hair, put on lipstick, lit the candles in the dining room. At 8:30, she checked the window. At 9, she called him. No answer. At 10, the food was cold. The candles had burned halfway down. Regina sat at the table alone in the red dress, staring at the empty chair across from her. By the time Walter finally walked through the front door, it was after midnight. He looked tired. His tie was loose. And when Regina stood up, the first thing she noticed was the smell. Expensive perfume, not hers. Walter stopped when he saw the table. For a second, something passed across his face. Maybe guilt, maybe annoyance. Regina folded her arms. "You forgot." Walter dropped his keys onto the counter. "I had a long night." "A long night doing what?" "I told you. Work. You do not smell like work." Walter looked away. The silence between them stretched so long that Regina could hear the refrigerator humming. She looked down at her dress, at the cold food, at the candles, then back at him. "You could have called." Walter rubbed the back of his neck. "I did not think it was a big deal." Regina stared at him. Not a big deal. She wanted to scream, wanted to ask him why he looked at her differently now, wanted to ask when she stopped being enough. Instead, she stood there quietly while Walter walked past her and disappeared into the bedroom. He did not apologize. He did not touch her. He did not even turn around. A few minutes later, Regina was still standing alone in the kitchen. The food was cold. The candles had gone out. And for the first time since she married him, Regina began to wonder if she was already losing the man she loved. After the night of the cold dinner and the red dress, something changed inside Regina. Not all at once. She still woke up every morning beside Walter, still folded his laundry, still asked if he wanted coffee before work. But there was a quiet fear sitting in the middle of everything now. The kind of fear that follows a woman when she already knows the truth, but is still praying she is wrong. Walter stayed out later. Sometimes he came home after midnight. Sometimes he did not come home at all. When Regina asked where he had been, he always had an answer ready. Work ran late. I was with clients. My phone died. Every answer sounded polished, too polished. And somehow, that made it worse. One night, Regina woke up at 2 in the morning and realized Walter was not in bed. The house was dark. She walked quietly to the front window and pulled the curtain back just enough to see outside. Walter was sitting in his car at the curb. The light from his phone lit up his face. He was smiling, not a small smile, a real one, the kind Regina had not seen in months. Her chest tightened. She let the curtain fall and stood there in the dark, because women know, maybe not right away, maybe not the first time, but eventually, we know. The next afternoon, Regina stopped at the grocery store after work. She walked slowly through the aisles, tired and distracted, throwing things into her cart without really paying attention. Milk, bread, coffee, mac and cheese. She was standing near the frozen food section when she saw him, Walter. At first, Regina almost smiled from relief. For one stupid second, she thought maybe he had taken the afternoon off to surprise her. Then she saw the woman beside him. She was beautiful in a way that looked expensive. Tight white dress, perfect hair, high heels that clicked across the floor. A diamond bracelet flashed on her wrist every time she moved. She laughed at something Walter said and touched his arm like she belonged there. Regina froze. The cart slipped from her hands a little. She stood there staring from the end of the aisle, while Walter wrapped one hand around the woman's waist. Then he kissed her, right there, in the middle of the store. Like Regina had never existed. For a second, the whole world went quiet. Regina could not hear the music in the store anymore, could not hear the carts rolling past, could not hear anything except the sound of her own heart breaking. She turned around before Walter could see her. Her hands were shaking so badly, she left the cart in the aisle and walked straight out of the store. By the time she got to the car, she could barely breathe. She locked the doors, grabbed the steering wheel, and finally let herself fall apart. She cried so hard, her chest hurt. The ugly kind of crying, the kind where you cannot catch your breath, the kind where you press your hand over your mouth because you are scared. The sound coming out of you will scare even yourself. How could you do this to me? She whispered. She sat in that parking lot for almost 30 minutes before she finally drove home. When Walter came through the front door that night, Regina was waiting. She stood in the bedroom doorway with her arms folded. Walter looked up from taking off his jacket. What? Who is she? Walter stopped. What are you talking about? The woman at the grocery store. For a second, something flickered across his face. Not shame, not guilt. Annoyance. You followed me? Regina stared at him. I did not follow you. I saw you. Walter looked away and rubbed his jaw. Regina felt tears burning behind her eyes. Just tell me the truth. He was quiet for a moment. Then he sat down on the edge of the bed and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. You want the truth? Regina swallowed hard. No, she said softly. I want you to tell me I am wrong. Walter looked down at the floor. She understands me. Regina blinked. Understands you? She comes from a different world, Walter said. She knows people. She has money, connections. She gets what I want out of life. Regina stared at him like she had never seen him before. So now money matters more than loyalty. Walter did not answer. That silence hurt more than anything he could have said, because she knew. He had already made his choice. Over the next few weeks, the whole neighborhood found out. North Ohio was not the kind of place where secrets stayed hidden. People saw Walter driving around town in expensive cars with the woman. They saw him at restaurants and parties. They saw Regina sitting on her porch alone at night. People talked. Some pretended to care. Others enjoyed it. At the beauty supply store, Regina heard two women whispering when she walked past. That is Walter's wife. You mean ex-wife? She does not know yet. Regina kept walking. At church, people looked at her too long. At the gas station, somebody asked if she was doing all right with that fake voice people use when they really just want details. The worst moment came one Saturday afternoon. Regina was standing in line at a small store downtown when a woman from the neighborhood looked at her and said, I heard Walter upgraded. The woman laughed a little after she said it, like it was a joke, like Regina was supposed to laugh too. Regina looked at her so coldly. The smile dropped right off the woman's face. But later, sitting alone in the car, Regina cried all over again, because even when you know somebody is cruel, the words still find a place to hurt you. A few nights later, Walter came home drunk. He stumbled into the living room while Regina sat curled up on one end of the couch. "You should have seen the party," he said, laughing to himself. Regina did not even look at him. "I do not care." Walter dropped down into the chair across from her. "She bought me a watch." Regina stayed quiet. "A real expensive one." Still nothing. Walter looked at her for a second. Then he smiled in that ugly way people do when they know they are about to say something that will leave a mark. "You never could give me the kind of life she can." Regina felt the air leave her lungs. For a moment, she just stared at him, not because she did not hear him, because she did, too clearly, after everything she had done for him, after loving him when he had nothing, after standing beside him when he was fixing tires and barely making enough money to pay bills. This was what he thought of her. Walter leaned back in his chair. She has ambition. She wants more. Regina stood up, slowly. "You think money makes you important now?" Walter rolled his eyes. "She believes in me." Regina laughed once, a short, painful sound. "I believed in you when nobody else did." Walter looked away. "You were working in your uncle's garage," Regina said. "You had holes in your boots and rust on your truck." Walter's jaw tightened. "And the woman you are with now," Regina continued, "she never would have looked twice at you back then." "Regina, no. You listen." For the first time in months, her voice stopped shaking. "You forgot who loved you before anybody else did." Walter looked down. Maybe he felt guilty. Maybe he was embarrassed. Or maybe he simply did not care enough anymore. That night, after he went to bed, Regina sat alone in the living room until sunrise. The house was quiet. The same couch, the same pictures, the same walls, but none of it felt like home anymore. 3 days later, Regina packed 2 suitcases. She folded her clothes carefully, packed family photographs, packed the sweater her mother bought her for Christmas. At the bottom of the dresser drawer, she found the silver necklace Walter had given her years ago at the flea market. She held it in her hand for a long time. Then she put it back. Some things no longer belonged to her. Walter stood in the doorway while she zipped the suitcase. "You are really leaving?" Regina looked at him. "You already left first." Walter said nothing. He did not apologize. He did not ask her to stay. He did not fight for her. And somehow, that hurt even more than the cheating. Regina picked up the suitcases and walked out the front door. The neighborhood was watching. People stood on porches, pretending not to stare. Curtains moved in windows. The same people who once called them the perfect couple watched Regina walk down the street alone. She reached the end of the block and stopped for a second. Then she looked back, at the porch swing, at the kitchen window, at the house where she once believed she would grow old. Tears filled her eyes, because she still loved Walter. That was the painful part. She still loved him. She just finally loved herself a little more. The apartment sat above an old barber shop on the far side of North Ohio. There was a laundromat next door that stayed open all night, and every few hours Regina could hear the heavy dryers thumping through the wall. The staircase leading up to the apartment was narrow and smelled faintly like cigarette smoke and old carpet cleaner. When Regina unlocked the door for the first time, she stood there quietly for a moment with her 2 suitcases still in her hands. The apartment was smaller than she remembered. 1 bedroom, 1 tiny bathroom, a kitchen barely big enough for a table and 2 chairs. The carpet had dark stains near the window. The sink dripped every few seconds. The heater made a rattling noise, like it was struggling to stay alive. But it was quiet. No Walter. No perfume that did not belong to her. No waiting by the window for headlights that never came. Regina walked inside slowly and set her suitcases near the couch. For the first time in days, nobody was watching her. Not the neighbors. Not the women whispering at the store. Not Walter standing in the doorway saying nothing while she left. Just silence. And somehow, that made everything hurt worse. That first night, Regina did not even unpack. She found an old blanket in one of the boxes and curled up on the couch in an oversized t-shirt. The apartment felt too still, too empty. Every sound reminded her of what she had lost. The refrigerator humming reminded her of late nights in the kitchen with Walter. Rain tapping against the window reminded her of all the nights they fell asleep with his arm around her. Even the empty side of the couch hurt, because for years, Walter always sat there. By midnight, Regina still had not slept. She got up, walked into the kitchen, and poured herself a glass of water. Her hands were shaking. She leaned against the counter and stared out the window at the parking lot below. The barbershop sign blinked red and blue across the street. A car pulled into the laundromat. Somebody laughed outside. Life kept moving. That was the part that felt unfair. Her whole world had fallen apart, but everybody else was still buying groceries, folding laundry, going to work, laughing like nothing happened. Regina pressed one hand over her mouth. Then she slid slowly down the kitchen cabinet until she was sitting on the floor. And finally, she cried. Not loudly, just quietly. The kind of crying people do when they are exhausted. The kind where tears slip down your face and you are too tired to even wipe them away. The next few weeks passed like that. Regina barely left the apartment unless she had to. She unpacked slowly. One box one day, another box the next. She hung her clothes in the closet, put framed family pictures on the dresser, folded blankets, tried to make the apartment feel like home, but every room still felt temporary, like she was only staying there until her real life came back. Every morning, she woke up for 1 second, forgetting. Then she looked around and remembered she was alone. One morning, about 3 weeks after moving in, Regina woke up feeling strange. Her stomach hurt. Her head felt heavy. She stood in the kitchen trying to make eggs, but the smell hit her so hard, she nearly dropped the pan. She ran to the bathroom and knelt beside the toilet. After a few minutes, she sat back against the bathtub, breathing hard. "No," she whispered. Her voice sounded small in the empty apartment. She looked down at the calendar hanging on the wall. Then she counted silently. Once, then again. Her stomach dropped. An hour later, Regina sat on the closed toilet seat holding a small white box from the drugstore. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped it. The bathroom was tiny. The light above the mirror flickered every few seconds. The sink still leaked. Drip, drip, drip. Regina stared down at the pregnancy test in her hand. Then she closed her eyes. "I cannot do this," she whispered. But deep down, she already knew. A few minutes later, she looked again. 2 lines, bright, clear, impossible to explain away. Regina stared at the test for so long, her eyes blurred. Pregnant. She was pregnant with Walter's child. For a second, she almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because life had a cruel sense of timing. The man who no longer wanted her, the man who had already moved on, the man who made her feel like she was not enough. He had left her with the one thing she would never stop loving. Regina set the test down on the sink and covered her face with both hands. The tears came immediately. She cried sitting there on the bathroom floor with her back against the tub and her knees pulled to her chest. "I am scared," she whispered into the empty room, because she barely had enough money for rent. She had no family nearby, no husband, no plan, just a tiny apartment above a barbershop and a future she did not know how to face. Hours later, the sun had gone down. The apartment was dark, except for the street light shining through the window. Regina sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. The laundromat next door was still open. She could hear the dryers running through the wall. Slowly, she lowered one hand to her stomach. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. "I do not know how I am going to do this." Tears filled her eyes again. "But I promise you something." She swallowed hard. "No matter what happens, I am not leaving you." Regina sat there quietly, with her hand over her stomach. And for the first time since she walked away from Walter, she understood something. She could not afford to fall apart anymore. Because now, she was not fighting only for herself. After the night Regina promised the baby she would keep going, she stopped waiting for life to get easier. Instead, she learned how to survive it. By the end of the month, she had 2 jobs. In the mornings, she worked at a diner near the highway, just outside North Ohio. At night, she cleaned office buildings downtown. The diner smelled like coffee, bacon, and old grease. The office buildings smelled like floor polish and printer paper. Neither job paid much, but together they kept the lights on. Every morning, Regina woke up before sunrise. She pulled her hair into a loose bun, put on the pale blue diner uniform, and walked 3 blocks through the cold to catch the bus. The diner was always busy. Truck drivers, older men reading newspapers, tired mothers with kids. People in North Ohio loved routine, and the diner had become part of theirs. Regina learned which customers wanted extra cream, which ones complained about everything, and which ones left good tips. She smiled when she had to, laughed when people made jokes, moved from table to table with aching feet and a stomach that kept getting harder to hide. Most days, she was too busy to think. But North Ohio never stayed quiet for long. People talked. They always had. And now, Regina was the story. Somebody had seen Walter at a restaurant with the rich woman. Somebody said they were living together in a big house across town. Somebody said she bought him a truck. Somebody else said they were getting married. Every rumor found its way back to Regina. One afternoon, she was carrying 2 plates of pancakes when the bell above the diner door rang. Regina looked up. 2 women from her old neighborhood walked in. She recognized them immediately. The same women who always knew everybody else's business before breakfast. The same women who stood on their porches pretending they were only outside for fresh air. They slid into a booth by the window. Regina tried to avoid them. No luck. A few minutes later, she walked over with coffee. The first woman looked up at her slowly. "Well," she said. "Look who it is." Regina forced a smile. "What can I get you?" The second woman leaned back in the booth. "Isn't this Walter's ex-wife?" The first woman shook her head dramatically. "Poor thing." Regina set the coffee cups down without answering. Then the second woman said it, loud enough for half the diner to hear. "I heard he is marrying that rich woman." The first woman gave Regina a fake sad smile. "Imagine losing your husband and ending up serving pancakes." The 2 women laughed. For 1 second, Regina wanted to throw the coffee in both their faces. She wanted to tell them they had no idea what she had survived, wanted to ask them why people always seemed so entertained by somebody else's pain. Instead, she gripped the coffee pot tighter and walked away. By the time she reached the kitchen, she could barely breathe. She stood beside the freezer with her back against the wall and pressed both hands to her face. Her eyes burned. Her throat hurt. Then, out of nowhere, she heard her grandmother's voice. "Never let people watch you break. Some folks enjoy it too much." Regina lowered her hands slowly. Her grandmother used to say that every time life got hard, when Regina was little and cried because girls at school teased her, when her father lost his job, when her mother got sick and still showed up to church smiling, "Cry if you need to," her grandmother always said. "Just do it where nobody gets to feel powerful for causing it." Regina took 1 deep breath, then another. She fixed her apron, wiped under her eyes, and walked back out into the diner. The 2 women looked disappointed. Good. That night, after her shift at the diner, Regina changed clothes in the employee bathroom and took the bus downtown. The office building where she worked at night was 12 stories tall with shiny floors and giant windows looking over the city. Regina cleaned empty conference rooms, vacuumed carpets, emptied trash cans, and wiped fingerprints off glass doors while everybody else went home. By the time she finished, her back hurt so badly she sometimes had to sit in the stairwell for a few minutes before walking home. The pregnancy made everything harder. By 4 months, her feet swelled if she stood too long. By 5, she could not hide it anymore. Her stomach was beginning to show. At first, she wore oversized sweaters. Then one day she looked at herself in the mirror and stopped trying to cover it. She stood there in the tiny apartment, wearing one of Walter's old shirts and resting both hands on her stomach. "You are not something to hide," she whispered. After that, she stopped being ashamed. At night, after work, Regina sat by the window with her hand on her stomach and talked to the baby. Sometimes she talked about her day. "Today a man left me a $2 tip and acted like he gave me $1 million. Sometimes she talked about the future. "I do not know where we are going to live when you get bigger." Sometimes she talked about Walter, not because she wanted to, because some nights the sadness still found her. "I wish things were different," she whispered one evening. "I wish you were coming into a world where your father knew how to love people." Then she shook her head. "No, that is not true." She looked down at her stomach. "You are coming into a world where you will be loved. That matters more." Slowly, without even realizing it, Regina became stronger. Not in some big dramatic way. Nobody looked at her and saw a different woman. She still worked too much, still cried some nights, still felt lonely. But now, every morning, she got up anyway. Every night, she came home anyway. Every day she kept going, and sometimes that is what strength looks like. One cold evening in November, Regina finished cleaning the last office on the 10th floor and looked out the window. Freezing rain was falling outside. The parking lot below was covered in a thin layer of ice. She sighed, grabbed her coat and cleaning supplies, and headed downstairs. By the time she stepped outside, the wind was biting through her clothes. Regina shifted the heavy bags in her hands and started walking across the parking lot. Her feet hurt. Her back hurt. She was tired enough to cry. She had almost reached her car when it happened. Her foot slipped. 1 second, she was walking. The next, the world disappeared beneath her. The bags flew from her hands. Regina hit the ground hard. Pain shot through her side and across her stomach. For one terrifying moment, she could not breathe. She grabbed her stomach and gasped. "No," she whispered. The rain hit her face. The parking lot spun. Then suddenly, she heard footsteps running toward her. A man's voice cut through the dark. "Hey, do not move." Regina lay on the cold pavement, clutching her stomach. The freezing rain soaked through her coat and into her clothes. Her hair stuck to her face. She could barely breathe. Footsteps came closer. Then a man dropped to one knee beside her. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was calm, steady, not loud, not panicked. The kind of voice that made you believe things might still be okay. Regina looked up at him through the rain. He looked older than her ex-husband, early 40s maybe. Tall, dark coat, clean-shaven. There was something polished about him, but not in a way that felt arrogant. He looked like the kind of man who belonged inside the office building behind them, not out in the freezing rain helping a stranger. "My stomach," Regina whispered. His face changed immediately. Without hesitation, he took off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Can you stand?" "I think so." She tried. The pain hit so sharply she nearly fell again. The man caught her before she could. "No," he said gently. "You are not walking." "I am fine," Regina said automatically. She had spent months saying those words. At work, to herself, to everybody. The man looked right at her. "No," he said again. "You are not." For some reason, that almost made her cry. He helped her into a black car parked near the building. The inside smelled like leather and cedar. Regina sat there shaking while he drove through the rain toward the hospital. He kept one hand on the steering wheel and glanced over at her every few seconds. "You are going to be okay," he said. Regina stared out the window. She wanted to believe him, but lately, life had taught her not to trust promises. At the hospital, he stayed. That surprised her more than anything. Most people would have dropped her off and left. Walter would have. Her ex-husband could barely stay home for dinner. But this man stayed. He filled out paperwork when Regina's hands were shaking too badly to hold the pen. He sat beside her in the waiting room while nurses moved around them. He bought her a bottle of water from the vending machine, even though she said she did not want anything. "You should drink something," he said. Regina looked down at the bottle in her hands. "Thank you. You do not have to thank me." But she did, because nobody had taken care of her in a very long time. The wait felt endless. Every minute made Regina more afraid. She sat in the hospital bed, gripping the thin blanket, while the doctor checked the baby. She could not stop thinking about everything she had already lost. "Please," she thought silently. "Please, do not take this too." Finally, the doctor smiled. "The baby is fine." Regina broke down instantly. The tears came so fast she could not stop them. She covered her face with both hands. The man beside her quietly handed her a tissue. "See?" he said softly. "I told you." Regina looked at him through tears. "You stayed." He looked confused. "Of course I stayed," like it was the most normal thing in the world. Hours later, when Regina was finally allowed to leave, they stood together near the hospital entrance. The rain had stopped. The parking lot was wet and shining under the streetlights. Regina pulled his coat tighter around herself. "I never even asked your name," she said. He smiled a little. "Walter." Regina froze. For 1 second, she thought life was playing some kind of joke on her. Then he saw the look on her face and laughed softly. "Bad name?" Regina stared at him. "You have no idea." For the first time in months, she laughed too. A real laugh. Not forced, not polite. It felt strange, like using a part of herself she had forgotten was still there. The next morning, Regina was back at the diner. Her feet hurt. Her back hurt. She barely slept, but the baby was okay. That was enough. Around 10 o'clock, the bell above the door rang. Regina looked up automatically, and there he was, Walter, the new Walter. He walked in wearing a dark coat and sat in a booth near the window. Regina stared at him for a second. Then she walked over. "What are you doing here?" He looked up from the menu. "I heard the coffee is terrible." Regina folded her arms. "It is, so I guess I am not here for the coffee." She tried not to smile. "You really should work on your lines." Walter looked pleased with himself. "I thought that one was pretty good." Regina shook her head and poured him coffee anyway. He came back the next day, and the day after that. At first, Regina told herself it was a coincidence. By the fourth day, she knew it was not. "You do not even like coffee," she said one morning. "No. Then why do you keep coming here?" Walter looked at her over the rim of his cup. "Because I like talking to you." Regina looked down quickly, before he could see her smile. After her shift, he started walking her home. The first time, Regina told him he did not have to. "I know," he said. "I want to." They walked slowly through the cold streets of North Ohio, while the sky turned orange above them. At first, they talked about small things: the weather, the diner, the office building where Regina worked. Then, little by little, they talked about bigger things. Regina told him she used to love sitting by the lake when she was younger. Walter told her he hated being in crowded rooms even though people assumed he loved attention. One night, standing outside her apartment building, he looked up at the laundromat sign flashing next door. "You live here by yourself?" Regina nodded. Walter looked at her for a moment. "You must be tired." Regina laughed quietly. "You have no idea." After that, some nights they sat in his car outside her apartment instead of going inside right away. The heater hummed softly while snow gathered on the windshield. They talked for so long Regina sometimes forgot how late it was. One night, she was staring out the window when Walter spoke quietly. "You smile when you are hurting." Regina looked at him. "What?" "You joke when you are sad," he said. "You keep acting like you are okay, even when you are not." She looked away. "No, I do not." "Yes, you do." There was no judgment in his voice, only kindness. That somehow made it harder. Regina swallowed hard. "I do not know how to need people anymore." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Walter was quiet for a second. Then he turned toward her. "You do not have to do everything alone." Regina stared down at her hands in her lap. Nobody had said that to her in a long time, not since before Walter changed. The old Walter, the one she used to know. Outside, snow kept falling. Inside the car, everything was quiet. Then slowly, carefully, Walter reached across the seat and took her hand. His hand was warm, steady, safe. Regina looked down at it, then up at him. And for the first time since the day she walked out of her marriage, she felt something she thought was gone forever: hope. By the time winter turned into spring, Regina was exhausted. She was 7 months pregnant. The tiny apartment above the barber shop felt even smaller now. There were baby clothes folded in drawers, a second-hand crib beside the bed, tiny socks hanging over the back of a chair. Most nights, Regina still worked until she physically could not anymore. The diner finally told her to stop coming in after one customer nearly fainted, seeing her carry a tray while 8 months pregnant. "You are going to give somebody a heart attack," her manager told her. Regina laughed. "I need the money. You need to sit down." At night she still cleaned offices, but even that became harder. Walter argued with her about it constantly. The new Walter. "You are not going tonight," he said one evening, standing in her kitchen with his sleeves rolled up. Regina was trying to pull on her coat. "I have to." "No." She looked at him. "You do not understand." Walter stepped closer. "No, you do not understand." His voice stayed calm, but there was something firm underneath it. "You are carrying a child." Regina looked down automatically. Then he smiled faintly. "Maybe two, the way you complain about your back." She rolled her eyes. "You are very funny. I am serious." He reached for her coat and hung it back over the chair. "You are staying home tonight." Regina wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she did not need help, but she was so tired she almost cried instead, so she let him stay. That night, Walter made grilled cheese in her tiny kitchen while she sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket. He burnt the first sandwich, then the second. By the third one, Regina was laughing so hard she had tears in her eyes. "You are worse than my ex-husband," she said before she could stop herself. The room went quiet. Walter looked down at the burnt sandwich in his hand. Then he smiled a little. "Well," he said softly, "I hope I do better in every other way." Regina looked at him, and somehow that hurt and healed her at the same time. 2 weeks later, she went into labor. It happened at 2 in the morning. Regina woke up with a sharp pain in her stomach. At first, she thought maybe she had slept wrong. Then another pain came. Stronger this time. She sat up quickly in bed. "No," she whispered. The next pain hit before she could even stand. Regina grabbed the side of the bed and reached for her phone. Her hands were shaking. She called Walter. He answered on the first ring. "Regina, I think." She stopped to breathe. "I think it is time." Walter was at her apartment in less than 10 minutes. He came through the door wearing sweatpants, a coat thrown over a t-shirt, and shoes that did not even match. Regina would have laughed if she was not in pain. "You look terrible," she said through clenched teeth. "You called me at 2 in the morning. You still look terrible." "Good," he said. "At least you are still insulting me." Another contraction hit. Regina grabbed his arm so hard he winced. "Drive," she snapped. Walter drove to the hospital like a man trying very hard not to panic. "You are going too slow," Regina shouted from the passenger seat. "I am already 10 over the speed limit." "Then go faster. You yelled at me for almost running that stop sign because you almost killed us." Walter gripped the steering wheel tighter. "You are terrifying. I am in labor." Fair point. By the time they reached the hospital, Regina could barely walk. Walter helped her inside, stayed beside her through every contraction, and let her nearly crush his hand without complaining. Hours passed. The room was bright and cold. Regina was sweating, crying, angry. At one point, she looked at Walter and said, "This is your fault." He blinked. "I do not think that is biologically possible. Do not argue with me." "I am not arguing." "You are arguing." He raised both hands. "Okay, it is my fault." Finally, after hours that felt endless, the doctor looked up. "There is another baby." Regina stared at her. "What?" Walter looked just as shocked. "What do you mean, another baby?" The doctor smiled. "You are having twins." For 1 second, the whole room went silent. Then Regina started crying. "Twins?" Walter looked like somebody had hit him in the head with a chair. "2 babies?" "Yes," the doctor said. Walter sat down quickly. "I need a second." Regina laughed and cried at the same time. A few minutes later, the first baby was born, a little boy. Regina stared at him in disbelief as the nurse placed him in her arms. He was tiny, perfect. Then came the second baby, a little girl. Walter stood beside the bed with tears running down his face. "They are beautiful," he whispered. Regina looked up at him. He was crying openly now, not trying to hide it, not embarrassed, just standing there looking at the twins like they were the most important thing he had ever seen. Later that night, after everything finally became quiet, Regina lay in the hospital bed, holding the little girl, while the little boy slept in a bassinet beside her. Walter sat in the chair near the window. He had not gone home, had not complained, had not even looked at the time. He stood up when the little boy started crying and gently picked him up. To Regina's surprise, the baby stopped almost immediately. Walter looked down at him. "Well," he said softly, "I guess we are figuring this out together." "We." The word caught Regina off guard. Nobody had ever said that to her before, not when life was hard, not when things got messy. The old Walter always loved her when it was easy. This Walter was still here when she was exhausted, scared, swollen, crying, and completely overwhelmed. He stayed through the first night. Then the second. He learned how to hold the babies, how to make bottles, how to rock them when they cried. A week later, Regina woke up in the middle of the night at the apartment and found him asleep on the couch with both babies lying on his chest. The television was still on low. One tiny hand rested against his shirt. Regina stood there in the doorway staring at them. Her chest hurt in the strangest way, because nobody had ever stayed for her like this. The next afternoon, Walter brought groceries to the apartment. Real groceries, not the canned soup and cheap noodles Regina usually bought. Fresh fruit, diapers, formula, new baby blankets. Regina stared at everything spread across her tiny kitchen table. You spent too much money. Walter looked confused. What money? Walter, he smiled. You should see what I spend on coffee. She laughed, then stopped, because she realized he was serious. A few days later, a black car pulled up outside the apartment building to pick him up. Not just a nice car, a driver. The man stepped out, opened the back door, and called him sir. Regina stood at the window holding the little girl. Walter noticed her expression and sighed. What? He asked. Regina looked at him slowly. Who exactly are you? Walter stood in Regina's tiny kitchen with one hand resting on the counter and the other holding the little boy against his shoulder. The driver was still waiting downstairs. The little girl was asleep in her swing near the couch. Regina folded her arms. Who exactly are you? Walter looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked down at the baby in his arms, like he was trying to decide how honest to be. Finally, he let out a slow breath. I own the building you clean. Regina blinked. The office building? Walter nodded. And a few others. A few. He looked almost uncomfortable. Some hotels, apartment buildings, real estate. Regina stared at him. How many buildings? Walter gave her a look. Enough that I stopped counting a while ago. For a second, Regina thought he had to be joking. Then she remembered the driver, the black car, the watch he wore that looked like it cost more than her old apartment, the way people at the hospital moved when he walked into a room, the little details she had noticed and ignored because she never imagined they could mean something this big. You are rich, she said slowly. Walter made a face. I hate that word. Why? Because people hear it, and suddenly they stop looking at you like a person. Regina sat down at the kitchen table. The room felt strangely quiet. How rich? Walter rubbed the back of his neck. Rich enough that people write articles about me sometimes. Regina stared at him. Walter, he gave up. I am a billionaire. The silence that followed lasted so long that even the baby in his arms looked up at him. Regina laughed once. A short, shocked laugh. You are... what? Walter looked almost embarrassed. I know how it sounds. You let me serve you bad coffee for months. You really did have terrible coffee. Regina pointed at him. Do not change the subject. I am not. You are a billionaire. Walter shrugged one shoulder. And you are still yelling at me in a kitchen above a barber shop. For some reason, that made Regina laugh again. She covered her face for a second. I do not understand. Walter sat across from her. The little boy was asleep now. His tiny face pressed against Walter's chest. I did not tell you because I wanted you to know me before you knew what I had. Regina looked at him. I have spent most of my life around people who cared more about my money than they cared about me, he said quietly. Women who loved the house, the car, the dinners, the vacations. He looked down, but nobody ever stayed when things got difficult. Something in Regina's chest tightened, because she understood that, more than anybody, you stayed for me in a hospital waiting room, she said softly. Walter looked up. You stayed when I was scared and broke and pregnant. You were never just those things. Regina looked away before he could see how much that affected her. After that, she started noticing things she had missed before. The phone calls he took were about companies and investments. The driver outside was always there at the same time. The office building where she used to clean belonged to him. One afternoon, she turned on the television while feeding the little girl and nearly dropped the bottle. Walter was on the news. He stood in front of one of his buildings wearing a suit while reporters talked about a business deal worth millions. The twins were asleep in their bassinets. Regina stared at the screen. Then Walter walked into the apartment carrying groceries. She pointed at the television. What is this? Walter looked at the screen and sighed. I hate local news. You were just on television. They always use that same bad picture. Regina could not stop laughing. You are ridiculous. No, he said. You just finally have proof. But the strangest thing about Walter was that none of it changed the way he treated her. He still showed up after work and loosened his tie the second he walked through the door, still headed straight for the babies. Where are my little bosses? He asked every evening. Regina would smile from the kitchen. In there, causing trouble. Walter walked dramatically into the living room. Oh no, not both of them. The twins kicked their legs and squealed every time they saw him. The little girl grabbed his finger with her tiny hand. The little boy laughed every time Walter made ridiculous faces at him. Sometimes Regina stood in the doorway just watching them, watching Walter lie on the floor in an expensive suit while two babies climbed all over him, watching him smile when he thought nobody was paying attention, and every time the same thought came into her mind. He stayed. The old Walter stopped touching her long before he left. This Walter looked for her without even realizing it. He left little notes in the kitchen before work. You forgot how beautiful you are. Or, there is soup in the fridge. Eat before you tell me you are not hungry. Sometimes he wrote, dinner at 7. Bring your smile. Regina saved every note in the kitchen drawer. One evening, Walter came over carrying takeout and flowers. You bought flowers? You sound offended. I am surprised. Walter set them on the counter. I was trying to do something nice. You bought flowers from a gas station. They were the last ones. Regina looked at the bouquet. Half the flowers were already bending sideways. She smiled anyway. They are terrible. You still like them. Unfortunately. Walter grinned. Some nights, after the twins were finally asleep, they sat together on the couch in the apartment. The television played quietly in the background. Regina curled up beside him with a blanket over her legs. Walter rested one arm around her shoulders. At first, she stayed stiff, not because she did not want him close, because she had forgotten how to trust comfort. The old Walter taught her that love could disappear without warning, that a person could kiss you one day and make you feel unwanted the next, but the new Walter was patient. He never pushed, never asked for more than she was ready to give. One night, rain tapped softly against the window while Regina rested her head against his shoulder. Walter looked down at her. You are thinking too hard again. How do you know? You get that look. What look? The one where you stare at nothing and act like you are fine. Regina smiled faintly. I spent a long time pretending. You do not have to do that with me. The room went quiet. Regina looked up at him slowly. Walter reached over and brushed one loose curl away from her face. His fingers lingered for just a second. You know, he said quietly, I have been in rooms full of people my whole life. Regina looked at him. But you are the first person who ever made me feel at home. Her breath caught. Nobody had ever said anything like that to her. Not even when she was married. Especially not then. Walter touched her face gently, like she was something precious. Then he kissed her, slowly, carefully, like he was giving her time to change her mind. But Regina did not want to. She kissed him back. At first, she was nervous. Then she felt his hand settle softly against her cheek. No pressure, no rush, just warmth, safety. When he finally pulled away, Regina looked at him for a second, and she realized something she had almost forgotten. Love was not supposed to hurt this much. Real love did not make you beg. Real love felt like this. By the time the twins were 8 months old, Regina's life looked nothing like the life she thought she would have. The apartment above the barber shop was gone. Walter had insisted she move somewhere bigger after the twins started crawling and nearly pulling the lamp onto themselves twice in the same week. Now they lived in a quiet house outside North Ohio with wide windows, a backyard, and enough space for the twins to race from one room to another, laughing. Regina still was not used to it. Some mornings she woke up and expected to hear the laundromat next door. Instead, she heard birds outside the window and the sound of Walter downstairs making coffee badly. The little girl refused to sleep unless Regina sang to her. The little boy laughed every time Walter made a fool of himself. Every evening, Walter came home, loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves, and looked for the twins before he did anything else. Where are my little bosses? He asked one evening. Regina smiled from the kitchen. In the living room. They have taken over. Walter walked in dramatically. Well, this house used to belong to me. The little boy squealed. The little girl reached for him immediately. Regina stood in the doorway and watched. There were moments now when she forgot what it felt like to be hurt. Not because she forgot Walter, the old Walter, because she finally had enough good days that the bad ones stopped feeling like the whole story. One rainy Thursday morning, Regina walked to the front door after hearing the mail slot open. She picked up a stack of envelopes, bills, a magazine, an ad for carpet cleaning. Then she saw the last envelope. Cream-colored, heavy paper. Her name written in familiar handwriting. Regina froze. For a second, she just stared at it. Walter. Not the Walter upstairs helping the twins destroy the living room. The other one. Her ex-husband. She turned the envelope over slowly. Her stomach tightened. Walter looked up from the floor where the twins were climbing all over him. What is it? Regina did not answer. She opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a wedding invitation. Expensive, formal, white paper with gold lettering. Walter and the rich woman were getting married at a country club outside North Ohio. Regina read the words twice. Then she saw the handwritten line at the bottom. I really hope you come. For a moment, she could not even speak. Then she laughed, not because anything about it was funny, because the nerve of it was unbelievable. Walter stood up immediately. What happened? Regina handed him the invitation. He read it. Then his face changed. You have got to be kidding me. Regina folded her arms tightly across her chest. He wants me there. Walter looked back down at the card. Why? But Regina already knew. This was not kindness. This was not closure. The old Walter wanted to see her sitting in the back of the room alone. He wanted proof that she was still hurt, still lonely, still the woman he left behind. He wanted to stand beside another woman in an expensive suit and finally convince himself he had made the right choice. Regina sat down slowly at the kitchen table. For a second, all the old feelings came back. The grocery store, the perfume, the red dress, and the cold dinner. The women at the diner laughing at her. You never could give me the kind of life she can. She hated that those words still lived inside her. Walter sat across from her. You do not have to go. I know. Then do not. Regina stared down at the invitation. Part of her wanted to throw it into the fireplace and watch it burn. Part of her wanted to pretend it never arrived. But another part of her, the part that remembered sitting on the floor of that apartment above the barber shop crying because she thought her life was over, wanted him to see her now, not because she needed him back, not because she needed his approval, because she wanted him to understand that he did not destroy her. Walter reached for her hand. If you go, he said quietly, do it for yourself. Regina looked at him. Is there really a difference? Yes, he said. A big one. For the next few days, the invitation sat on the kitchen counter. Regina tried not to look at it. That did not work. Every time she walked past, she thought about the old Walter standing at the front of that ballroom, smiling like he had won. At night, she lay awake beside Walter, staring at the ceiling. He always noticed. You are thinking about him again, he said softly one night. I hate that you can tell. I can always tell. Regina turned toward him. The room was dark, except for the moonlight coming through the window. I want him to see that he did not ruin me, she whispered. Walter was quiet for a second. Then he reached over and gently touched her face. Then let him see. She looked at him. You really think I should go? Walter smiled faintly. I think the man who hurt you spent too long believing he was the best thing that ever happened to you. Regina looked down. Walter lifted her chin carefully until she looked back at him. And I think it is time somebody proved him wrong. 3 weeks before the wedding, Regina made her decision. She was going. The next surprise came the following morning. Walter walked into the kitchen while Regina was making breakfast. Pack a bag. She looked up. For what? We are leaving. Leaving where? You ask too many questions. I ask exactly enough questions. Walter smiled. Chicago first. Regina stared at him. Chicago? Then, 2 days later, New York. Regina had never traveled like that before. Private cars waiting outside the airport. Hotel rooms with windows taller than her apartment used to be. Restaurants where people spoke softly and brought tiny food on giant plates. At first, Regina felt out of place. She kept looking down at herself like somebody was eventually going to realize she did not belong there. Walter noticed immediately. One night in Chicago, they stood in the lobby of a beautiful hotel while Regina looked around nervously. Walter stepped closer. What are you doing? Trying not to embarrass myself. You could never embarrass yourself. You clearly have never seen me try to use 5 different forks. Walter laughed. Then he leaned down and kissed her forehead. You belong anywhere you want to be. In New York, he took her shopping. Regina protested the entire time. I do not need all this. Yes, you do. No, I do not. You definitely do. By the end of the day, she was standing in front of a mirror, wearing an emerald dress that fit her like it had been made for her. The color made her skin glow. Her hair fell softly over her shoulders. For a second, Regina barely recognized herself. Walter stood behind her in the mirror. His eyes never left her. You are staring, she said quietly. I know, you are making it weird. I am making it honest. Later that night, they stood together on the balcony of the hotel. The city lights stretched out below them. Regina rested against the railing. Walter stepped behind her and wrapped his arms gently around her waist. You know what I see when I look at you? He asked. Regina smiled a little. What? A woman who survived everything that was supposed to break her. She turned slowly to face him. The wind moved her hair across her cheek. Walter reached into his pocket. Regina looked at him suspiciously. What are you doing? Relax, he said. I am not proposing. She laughed. You are impossible. He opened the small box in his hand. Inside was a pair of diamond earrings. Simple, beautiful. For the wedding, he said. Regina looked up at him. You really think I should go? Walter closed the box and placed it gently in her hand. No, he said softly. I think it is time somebody proved him wrong. Tell me honestly in the comments. If somebody who broke your heart invited you to watch them marry somebody else, would you go? Or would you leave the invitation unopened? The country club sat on a hill outside North Ohio, surrounded by trimmed hedges, stone fountains, and long black cars lined up in the driveway. Inside, everything looked expensive. White roses filled the room. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Champagne glasses rested on silver trays, while a string quartet played softly near the windows. It was exactly the kind of place Walter always used to talk about when he started chasing a different life, the kind of place Regina could never give him, or at least, that was what he believed. Walter stood near the front of the ballroom adjusting the sleeve of his gray suit. He looked good. Too good. The kind of good that comes from somebody who has spent months trying to prove they made the right choice. The rich woman stood beside him in a white dress that looked more expensive than Regina's first car. Her hair was perfect. Her makeup was perfect. Even her smile looked practiced. She slipped one hand around Walter's arm and looked around the room proudly. Your guests are very local, she said quietly. Walter gave a short laugh. That is North Ohio. Across the room, people from the neighborhood stood in little groups pretending not to stare. The same people who once watched Regina walk down the street with 2 suitcases now stood holding champagne and whispering behind their hands. Walter noticed them looking at him. He liked it. He liked the attention. He liked the way people looked at him now, like he had become somebody important. Near the back of the room, the 2 women from the diner stood beside the dessert table. The first woman leaned closer to the second. You think Regina is really coming? The other woman smirked. Oh, she will come. Why? Because women like her never stop loving men like him. The first woman laughed, especially after she ended up alone. Walter overheard them and smiled to himself. The rich woman looked up at him. What are they talking about? My ex-wife, the one you invited? Walter nodded. The rich woman looked surprised. You actually invited her? Walter picked up a glass of champagne. Of course. Why would you do that? Walter looked across the room toward the empty chairs near the back. Then he shrugged. I do not know. Maybe I wanted her to see that life moves on. The rich woman smiled slowly. You wanted her to see what she lost. Walter took a sip of champagne. He did not answer. He did not have to, because that was exactly what he wanted. Deep down, Walter had spent months imagining Regina showing up to the wedding. He pictured her alone, quiet, still wearing the same sad look she had the day she left. He imagined her sitting in the back while he stood at the front beside another woman. He imagined her realizing too late that he had become everything she said he never would. Successful, admired, wanted. Maybe that made him a bad person. But Walter had spent so long trying to convince himself he had made the right choice that he needed to see it. Needed to see Regina still hurting, still missing him, still wishing she had been enough. The rich woman adjusted her bracelet. What if she does not come? Walter smiled. Oh, she will. How do you know? He looked toward the door again. Because Regina always cared too much. Across the room, The two women from the diner had moved closer to the windows. One of them looked around dramatically. "I heard she had a baby." The other woman rolled her eyes. "Probably by some random man." "What a shame," the first woman said. "She used to be so pretty." They both laughed. Walter heard them. He should have felt guilty. Instead, he looked down at his watch. The ceremony was supposed to start in 20 minutes. The rich woman leaned closer. "If she comes, promise me one thing." "What?" "Do not let her ruin today." Walter gave a small laugh. "Regina is not going to ruin anything." But even as he said it, he kept glancing toward the door, because part of him still wanted to see her, wanted to see if she looked tired, wanted to see if she regretted leaving, wanted to know if there was still something in her eyes when she looked at him. The kind of look that says, "You still matter." One of the groomsmen walked over. "Everything good?" Walter nodded. "Perfect." The word sounded confident, but his stomach felt strange. He looked around the room again. The music, the flowers, the people, everything he thought he wanted. So why did he still keep thinking about the woman who used to dance with him in the kitchen barefoot? Why did he still remember the red dress? Why did he still think about the way Regina looked at him before he gave her a reason to stop? The rich woman squeezed his arm. "You are thinking about her." "No, I am not." "You are." Walter forced a smile. "I am standing here about to marry you." Then, "Stop looking at the door." Before he could answer, one of the country club workers hurried into the ballroom, looking nervous. He walked quickly toward Walter and leaned close enough that nobody else could hear. "Sir," he said quietly, "there is a problem." Walter frowned. "What kind of problem?" The worker shifted awkwardly. "There is a private jet." Walter stared at him. "What?" "It just landed at the airport outside town. Somebody from your guest list arrived." The rich woman looked confused. "What does that mean?" The worker swallowed hard. "There are several black SUVs heading this way." For 1 second, Walter said nothing. Then he laughed. A quick, uncertain laugh. No, but something in his face changed. Because suddenly, deep down, he knew. The room began to shift. People noticed the worker, noticed Walter's expression. The two women from the diner hurried toward the giant windows. Guests followed. The string quartet stopped playing. One by one, nearly everybody in the ballroom turned toward the front windows overlooking the driveway. And outside, through the falling rain, the first black SUV appeared at the gate. The first black SUV rolled slowly through the country club gates. Then came another and another. By the time the third one pulled into the circular driveway, the entire ballroom had gone silent. Nobody was pretending to sip champagne anymore. Nobody cared about the flowers, or the music, or the wedding. Every person in that room stood near the windows staring outside. The rain had started again, soft at first, then harder. Drops slid down the glass, while the line of black SUVs stopped one by one in front of the entrance. The two women from the diner pressed themselves so close to the window they almost looked ridiculous. "What is going on?" One whispered, "I do not know." Walter stood frozen near the front of the room. The rich woman still had one hand on his arm, but he barely seemed to notice, because suddenly, for the first time all day, Walter looked nervous. The first SUV door opened. Two men in dark suits stepped out. Security. They looked around quietly before moving to the side. The second SUV stopped behind them. Then the driver stepped out and opened the back door. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then Regina stepped out into the rain. The room stopped breathing. She stood there for a moment, beneath a black umbrella. The emerald dress fit her perfectly. Her hair fell softly over her shoulders. The diamond earrings caught the light every time she moved. But it was not the dress that made people stare. It was her. Regina did not look broken. She did not look tired. She did not look like the woman who sat alone in a diner uniform while people whispered about her. She looked calm, beautiful, untouchable, like the kind of woman people write songs about after they lose her. One of the women from the diner grabbed the other woman's arm. "Oh my God, that cannot be Regina." But it was. Regina lifted her head and looked toward the ballroom windows. For a second, her eyes met Walter's. He felt something sharp twist in his chest, because she was not looking at him the way she used to. There was no sadness there, no desperation, no look that said, "Please love me," nothing. The third SUV door opened. The twins stepped out, a little boy, a little girl, both dressed beautifully. The little girl held tightly to Regina's hand. The little boy looked around curiously before reaching up for the man stepping out behind them. And then the new Walter appeared. The room exploded. Wait, who is that? Oh my God, is that? Walter felt the blood drain from his face, because he knew exactly who that was. Everybody in Ohio knew. He had seen him in business magazines, on television, on billboards downtown. The billionaire, the man people said owned half the city, and he was standing beside Regina. No, not beside her, with her, like he belonged there. The new Walter adjusted the little boy's coat and rested one hand gently against Regina's back. It was a small movement, but everybody in the room noticed it. The protection, the familiarity, the quiet kind of love that did not need to show off. The rich woman looked up at Walter. Who is that man? Walter could not answer, because he was still staring at Regina, still trying to understand how this had happened. The woman he left behind was supposed to stay behind. She was supposed to still be the woman in the red dress crying beside a cold dinner. She was supposed to still want him. Instead, she looked happier than he had ever seen her. The little boy laughed at something the new Walter said. The sound carried through the open doorway as the country club staff rushed outside with umbrellas. Walter looked at the little boy again, then at the little girl, then back at Regina. His stomach dropped. The little boy had his eyes. The little girl had his smile. For one terrible second, Walter could not breathe. The room started whispering. Oh my God, those children. Look at the boy. They are his. No way. Yes, they are. The rich woman slowly let go of Walter's arm. What are they talking about? Walter stared through the window. The dates, the timing, the night Regina left, the months after. His mind started putting the pieces together, whether he wanted it to or not. Outside, Regina walked slowly toward the entrance with the twins beside her. The new Walter stayed close. The little girl stumbled slightly in her shoes. He bent down immediately and fixed the strap for her without missing a step. The little boy reached up for his hand. The new Walter took it. Like it was the easiest thing in the world. Walter watched the whole thing, and for the first time in his life, he felt something worse than jealousy. He felt regret, real regret. Not because Regina looked beautiful, not because another man had more money than he did, because another man had become the person he should have been. The ballroom doors opened. Regina stepped inside. The room went completely still. Nobody looked at the bride anymore. Nobody looked at Walter. Every eye in the room was on Regina. The rich woman stared at her. The two women from the diner looked like they wanted to disappear. Walter took one slow step forward. Regina. Her eyes moved to him calmly. Walter. Just his name. Nothing else. No anger. No tears. That hurt more than if she had screamed. Walter looked down at the twins standing beside her. The little girl rested against Regina's leg. The little boy held tightly to the new Walter's hand. Walter stared at them. Then, in a voice so quiet only the people nearest him could hear, he whispered, "Those are my children." The words hung in the room. Those are my children. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the soft rain tapping against the windows. Regina stood near the entrance, with one hand resting lightly on the little girl's shoulder. The new Walter stood beside her, calm and silent, the little boy still holding his hand. The old Walter stared at the twins like the world had just split open beneath him. His face had gone pale. He looked from the little boy to the little girl, then back to Regina. "Why?" he whispered. "Why didn't you tell me?" Regina looked at him quietly. For so long, she imagined this moment differently. She thought she would cry, thought she would scream, thought she would finally tell him every terrible thing he did to her. Instead, she just felt tired of explaining things to a man who only listened after it was too late. "You want to know why?" she asked. Walter nodded. Regina took one small step forward. "At what point was I supposed to tell you?" The room stayed silent. "Was I supposed to tell you during the nights you never came home?" Walter looked down. "Or during the phone calls you took outside because you did not want me hearing another woman's voice?" The rich woman slowly stepped away from him. Regina kept going. "Maybe I should have told you after I saw you in that grocery store with your hand around her waist." Walter swallowed hard. Or maybe when you came home smelling like perfume and looked at me like I was the problem. The old Walter opened his mouth. Regina. No. For the first time, her voice became sharper, not louder, just stronger. You abandoned me before I even knew I was pregnant. The room reacted all at once. A few people gasped quietly. The two women from the diner looked at each other with wide eyes. The rich woman turned slowly toward Walter. You left her while she was pregnant. Walter looked desperate. I did not know. Regina laughed once, a quiet, painful laugh. No, you did not. She looked around the room. Because you were too busy chasing money, parties, and people who made you feel important. Walter stepped toward her. Regina, please. I made a mistake. She looked right at him. No, she said. You made a choice. The words hit him like a slap. Because she was right. A mistake is something that happens once. Walter chose the other woman every day. He chose the late nights, the lies, the way he made Regina feel small in her own home. He chose all of it. The rich woman stared at him in disbelief. You told me she was bitter, she said quietly. Walter looked at her. She is my ex-wife. No, the rich woman said. You told me she could not let go. She looked toward Regina. The woman standing in front of her did not look bitter. She looked healed, beautiful, loved. The rich woman looked back at Walter. And now I know why. Walter turned toward Regina again. His voice dropped lower. Please, can we talk? Just the two of us? Before Regina could answer, the new Walter stepped forward. He did not raise his voice. He did not look angry. That somehow made it stronger. He rested one hand gently against Regina's back and looked at the old Walter. You should have appreciated her when she stood beside you with nothing. The old Walter's jaw tightened. You do not know anything about us. The new Walter looked at him steadily. No, he said. I know exactly enough. He looked down at the twins, then back at Walter. Unlike you, I know what it means to stay. The room went silent again, because everybody knew it was true. The old Walter stayed when Regina was easy to love, when she laughed in the kitchen and danced with him barefoot. The new Walter stayed when she was exhausted, heartbroken, pregnant, afraid, and convinced nobody would ever choose her again. The old Walter looked back at Regina, really looked at her, maybe for the first time in years. He saw the way she stood taller now, the way she did not shrink when he looked at her, the way her eyes no longer searched his face for love. The woman who once begged him to come home was gone, and he was the reason. The rich woman slowly reached up and pulled the engagement ring off her finger. Walter stared at her. What are you doing? She held the ring in her hand. You lied to me. I can explain. No, she said. You invited the woman you betrayed to this wedding so you could humiliate her. The old Walter shook his head quickly. That is not. You left her pregnant. His face fell. The rich woman looked disgusted. You did not even know your own children. Then she dropped the ring into his hand. The sound of it hitting his palm seemed louder than it should have. I think I have seen enough. She turned and walked away. The bridesmaids followed her. A few guests followed too. The room started breaking apart. People whispered. Some headed for the door. Others stood there staring at Walter like they had never seen him before. The two women from the diner looked embarrassed now. Good. Regina looked around the room one last time. The flowers, the candles, the expensive room Walter thought would prove he had won. It meant nothing, because he was still the same man, still standing in the middle of his own choices. Walter looked at her desperately. Regina, please. She looked at him one final time. There were no tears now, no anger, only peace. There is nothing left to say. Right before Regina turned away, if you believe nobody deserves a second chance after they throw away real love, subscribe now. Because Walter is finally learning what it costs to lose somebody who would have stood beside him through anything. Then Regina reached for the little girl's hand. The little boy reached up for the new Walter. Together, the four of them turned and walked toward the doors. Nobody stopped them. Behind them, Walter stayed exactly where he was, standing alone in the middle of a wedding that he had destroyed all by himself. By the time Regina walked out of the country club, the rain had stopped. The sky over North Ohio was beginning to clear, and the air smelled clean in that strange way it does after a storm. The black SUVs waited near the front steps. The driver opened the door. The twins were already half asleep. The little girl curled against Regina the second they climbed into the back seat. The little boy climbed into Walter's lap and fell asleep before they even reached the end of the driveway. For a while, nobody said anything. Regina looked out the window as the car rolled slowly through town. They passed the grocery store where she saw Walter kissing another woman, the park where they used to sit when they were younger, the old neighborhood, the same porches, the same houses. For years, every one of those places had felt haunted by what happened. Now, they just looked like streets, memories, nothing more. Walter reached across the seat and gently took her hand. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Regina looked down at their hands, then out the window again. For a second, she thought about the old Walter standing alone in that ballroom. The look on his face when he realized too late what he had lost. She thought she would feel satisfied. Instead, she mostly felt tired, and strangely, lighter. "I think so," she said softly. Walter squeezed her hand once, then he let the silence stay between them. The next morning, North Ohio exploded. By breakfast, everybody was talking about the wedding. People at church talked about it. People at the salon talked about it. People at the grocery store talked about it. Somebody posted a blurry photo online of Regina stepping out of the black SUV in the emerald dress with the twins beside her and the new Walter behind her. By noon, the whole town had seen it. The same people who spent months whispering about Regina suddenly sounded very different. One woman stopped Regina outside the pharmacy 2 days later. "You always were too good for him," she said with a smile. Regina looked at her for a moment. The woman was one of the same people who used to stare when Regina waited tables at the diner. One of the same people who acted like her pain was entertainment. Regina smiled politely. Then she kept walking, because one thing she had learned was this: never trust people who only respect you after somebody richer stands beside you. The two women from the diner never spoke to her again. One afternoon, Regina saw them in the grocery store, the same store where she once watched Walter kiss another woman. The second they noticed her, both women looked away and suddenly became very interested in a display of cereal. Regina almost laughed. For the first time in a long time, she did not feel small. She felt free. 3 days after the wedding, Walter called. The old Walter. Regina stared at his name lighting up her phone. For a second, she just looked at it. Then she pressed decline. He called again the next day, then again that night. By the end of the week, she blocked his number. So he started sending letters. The first one came on a Monday. Regina recognized his handwriting immediately. Her stomach tightened the second she saw it. She sat at the kitchen table while the twins napped upstairs. Walter was at work. The house was quiet. Slowly, she opened the envelope. "Regina, I know I do not deserve for you to read this, but I have to try. I made the biggest mistake of my life. I thought I wanted money and attention and all the things I did not have before. I thought that meant something, but standing there at the wedding and seeing you, seeing our children, I realized I threw away the only person who ever truly loved me. I am sorry." Regina stopped reading. For a moment, she just sat there staring at the letter in her hands. A year ago, those words would have destroyed her. A year ago, she would have cried all night reading them. A year ago, she might have believed them. Now they just felt late. The second letter came a few days later. This time, Walter wrote about the twins. He wanted to meet them, wanted a chance to explain, wanted her to know he thought about her every day. Regina read every word once. Then she folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope. Not because she was tempted, because she wanted to remember something important. A person can regret losing you and still not deserve you back. That was the difference. Regret is about what someone lost. Love is about what someone gives. The old Walter did not suddenly become a better man because he was lonely now. He was sorry because his life did not turn out the way he expected. Because Regina did not stay broken. Because somebody else loved her the way he should have. Too many people confuse being missed with being valued. They are not the same thing. Walter missed the woman who made him feel important when he had nothing. But when Regina actually needed him, he was gone. The new Walter never made speeches about loving her. He just stayed. When the babies cried at 2 a.m, when Regina felt insecure, when she was scared, when she still had nightmares about being left, He stayed. One evening, Walter found Regina sitting at the kitchen table, holding the third letter. He looked down at the envelope. You do not have to read those. I know. Then why do you? Regina looked down at the letter in her hand. Because I need to remember why I left. Walter sat beside her quietly. After a moment, he reached over and took her hand. You do not owe anybody another chance just because they finally learned your worth. Regina looked at him. Then she smiled. Because he was right. She gathered the letters together, walked upstairs, and locked them in the back of a drawer. Then she closed it. And for the first time she knew she was not closing a drawer. She was closing a door. A few weeks after the wedding, the first snow of the year came to North Ohio. It started early in the morning. By noon, the streets were white. The trees looked soft around the edges, and the whole town had gone quiet. The twins loved it. The little girl stood at the front window in her pajamas, clapping every time another snowflake landed on the glass. The little boy kept trying to eat the snow when Regina finally let them outside. Walter laughed so hard, he nearly dropped his coffee. Those are definitely your children, Regina said. Walter looked offended. No, that is all you. By the afternoon, the snow had slowed. Walter came into the kitchen while Regina was putting tiny mittens on the twins. Come with me. She looked up. Where? You ask too many questions. Regina smiled. And you still avoid answering them. Walter leaned down and kissed the top of her head. Get your coat. 20 minutes later, they were driving through the old part of North Ohio. The streets looked familiar under the snow. Regina recognized the gas station where she and Walter used to buy snacks after high school football games, the grocery store parking lot, the road leading toward the lake. Then she realized where they were going. The park? Walter glanced over at her. You still know it. Of course she did. The little park near the lake had once been her favorite place in the world. It was where the old Walter took her on their first real date, where they sat on the hood of his truck and talked about the future, where he proposed. For years, Regina avoided it. She thought if she ever came back, it would hurt too much. But now, walking through the snow with the twins and Walter beside her, it felt different. The park looked smaller than she remembered. The swings were old. The bench near the water had been painted a different color. But the tree was still there. The same tree where Regina and the old Walter carved their initials years ago. Regina stopped walking. The twins ran ahead through the snow while Walter stayed beside her. She stared at the old carving in the bark. For a second, she could almost see the younger version of herself standing there. Young, hopeful, certain that love meant staying no matter what. The old Walter had carved the first letter, then handed her the knife and told her to carve the second one. You know this means we are stuck with each other forever, he said back then. Regina smiled sadly at the memory. What are you thinking about? Walter asked softly. She looked at the tree. I used to think if you loved somebody enough, you stayed. Walter was quiet. I thought that was what made love real, Regina said. That you kept forgiving people, kept waiting, kept giving them more chances. She looked down at the snow beneath her feet. But I think I was really just afraid. Walter stepped closer. Afraid of what? Being alone. The words came out more quietly than she expected. Regina looked out toward the lake. For a long time, I thought being loved badly was still better than not being loved at all. Walter did not interrupt. He never did. I kept thinking if I just tried harder, maybe he would come back. Maybe he would love me the way he used to. She laughed softly. But the truth is, he already had. Walter looked at her. The old Walter loved me when life was easy, Regina said. When we were young, and he did not have anything to compare me to. She looked up slowly. You loved me when I had nothing left. Walter's face changed. That quiet look he got when something mattered too much for words. The twins were laughing near the swings now. The little girl had fallen into the snow and was giggling while the little boy tried to help her back up. Walter watched them for a second. Then he looked back at Regina. You know what I think? What? I think leaving somebody when they keep hurting you is one of the bravest things a person can do. Regina swallowed hard, because nobody had ever said that to her before. Most people acted like staying was noble, like women were supposed to keep giving and giving until there was nothing left. Walter reached for her hand. You left because you finally realized you deserved better. Regina looked down at his hand holding hers, then back at him. And now? Walter smiled faintly. Now, I think you know. The snow had started falling again, soft and quiet. The twins ran back toward them with red cheeks and wet mittens. The little girl wrapped herself around Regina's leg. The little boy reached for Walter. Walter picked him up with one arm. Then, without warning, he stepped back slightly. Regina frowned. "What are you doing?" Walter set the little boy down gently beside his sister. Then he reached into his coat pocket. Regina stared at him. "Walter, relax," he said with a nervous laugh. "This time, I am proposing." She looked at him in shock. Walter pulled out a small box. For the first time since she met him, he looked nervous, really nervous. His hand shook slightly. "I know your heart has been through a lot," he said quietly. The snow fell around them. The lake behind him looked silver in the fading light. "And I know you never needed anybody to save you." Regina felt tears fill her eyes immediately. Walter looked at her like she was the only thing in the world. "But if you let me," he said, "I would love to spend the rest of my life standing beside you." He opened the box. Inside was a ring. Simple, beautiful, perfect. Regina covered her mouth with one hand. For 1 second, she could not speak. Then she looked at him, at the man who stayed, the man who held her hand in a hospital waiting room, the man who loved her children like they were his own, the man who never once made her beg to be chosen. "Yes," she whispered. Walter blinked. "What?" "Yes." He laughed then, a real laugh, the kind that sounded like relief. He slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her before Regina could even finish crying. The twins started clapping because they thought something exciting was happening. Walter laughed against her mouth. Then, from the baby monitor in Regina's coat pocket, they heard crying. The little girl had dropped the monitor in the snow earlier, and now both twins were upset for no reason at all. Regina laughed through her tears. "Your children are ruining the moment." Walter smiled and touched her face gently. "Our children. They got married 3 months later, not at a country club, not in a ballroom filled with people pretending to care, just by the lake, the same lake where Regina once thought her first love would last forever. By then, spring had returned to North Ohio. The trees around the water were green again. The air smelled like fresh grass and rain. The ceremony was small, quiet, just the people who mattered. The twins wore matching clothes and spent most of the afternoon trying to chase ducks near the edge of the lake. The little girl kept picking flowers and handing them to Regina. The little boy refused to keep his shoes on. Walter spent half the morning putting them back on his feet. "You are laughing now," Regina said. "You try keeping shoes on a child who thinks he is faster than everybody. You wanted children. I still do." Regina smiled. "You are lucky they are cute." Walter looked down at the little boy trying to run across the grass in one sock. "They definitely got that from you." Regina wore white, nothing too dramatic, nothing that looked like she was trying to prove something. She did not need to. By the time she looked in the mirror that morning, she already knew she was beautiful, not because of the dress, because of the woman she had become. When she stepped out of the small room near the lake and Walter saw her, he stopped breathing for a second. Then his eyes filled immediately. Regina laughed softly. "Do not start. I am trying not to. You are failing." Walter smiled through tears. Unfortunately, the same word, the same joke. But this time, it felt different. Because this time, nobody was pretending. They stood together near the water, while the twins sat in the front row playing with flowers. The wind moved gently across the lake. Walter looked nervous. Regina loved that about him. No matter how confident he looked everywhere else, she was still the one thing that made him lose his words. When it was time for the vows, Walter went first. He looked at Regina for a long moment before speaking. "You came into my life when you thought everything was over," he said quietly. Regina felt tears rise immediately. "You spent so much time believing you had to earn love." Walter swallowed hard. "But you never had to earn mine." The twins had finally stopped moving long enough to stare at him. Walter smiled. "I promise that for the rest of my life, you will never have to wonder if you are enough." Regina closed her eyes for a second, because the old Walter once made her feel like she was too much, too emotional, too loyal, too needy, too easy to leave behind. The new Walter looked at all the same parts of her and loved her more because of them. When it was Regina's turn, her hands were shaking. Walter reached for them immediately. That helped. She smiled through tears. I used to think love meant staying, she said softly. Walter looked at her. I thought if you loved somebody enough, you kept forgiving them, kept waiting, kept hoping they would finally become the person you needed. The lake behind them was quiet. The twins had moved closer together in the grass. Regina looked into Walter's eyes. But you taught me something different. Walter squeezed her hands gently. You taught me that real love does not ask you to suffer to prove it is real. Tears slid down her face now. She did not even try to stop them. Thank you, she whispered, for loving me when I had forgotten how to love myself. Walter broke completely after that. He laughed once and wiped at his eyes. You are really trying to ruin me in front of everybody. You were already crying. You were crying first. Regina smiled. Unfortunately, even the pastor had tears in his eyes by the time he pronounced them. Married. Walter kissed her slowly beside the lake while the twins clapped and laughed because they thought that was part of the ceremony. For the first time in years, Regina felt completely at peace. No fear, no waiting, no wondering if she was enough. She already knew she was. That night, after the twins finally fell asleep, Regina stood outside on the porch with Walter. The stars were bright above them. The house was quiet. Walter wrapped one arm around her and kissed the side of her head. You okay? He asked softly. Regina looked out across the yard, then back at him. I think I have been waiting my whole life to feel like this. Walter smiled. You deserve it. Far away, across North Ohio, the old Walter sat alone in a house that looked impressive from the outside and empty everywhere else. The wedding never happened. The rich woman never came back. The expensive watch was still sitting on the kitchen counter where he left it. The house was quiet in the worst way. No laughter, no music, no children. Walter sat at the table, holding one of the letters Regina never answered. He had everything he once thought he wanted. The money, the parties, the big house, the expensive life, but none of it mattered now, because the one person who loved him before he had any of those things was gone. And for the first time in his life, Walter finally understood something. Being missed is not the same thing as being loved. Regina once gave him everything, her loyalty, her heart, her future, and he treated it like it would always be there. He thought she would stay no matter what he did. He was wrong, because loyalty is not weakness, and loving someone deeply does not mean you have to let them destroy you. The greatest revenge was not that Regina moved on. It was that she finally built a life so full of love, peace, and purpose. There was no room left for the man who broke her. If Regina's story touched you, share it with somebody who needs to remember they are not hard to love. Sometimes the wrong person leaves so the right one can finally find you. If this story meant something to you, take a moment to subscribe to Mr. Kingswell Stories and turn on notifications so you never miss the next unforgettable story. And before you go, leave a comment telling me one thing. Do you believe people can truly change? Or do they only change after they lose the person who loved them most?